Well, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are. A very warm welcome to everyone who is investing valuable time today to find out more about picking the right EU country for your crypto asset business. My name is Siân Jones. I'm a former regulator, a former crypto regulator, and now the chair of XReg Consulting. We're a public policy and regulatory affairs consultancy that focuses on crypto, DeFi, and Web3. When we talk about the EU today, we're referring not only to its 27 member states, but also to the three other countries within the European Economic Area, Iceland, Liechtenstein, and Norway, all of whom have bought into a common set of rules. Notably, one's looking at a market of some 450 million people, representing some 15% of world GDP. Choosing the right place in the EU to establish one's crypto asset business can be daunting. Not only is there a new EU-wide regulatory regime for crypto assets, about which you'll hear more during the next 45 minutes, but also other regulations that automatically apply to European crypto asset service providers, as well as a host of other non-regulatory considerations. Today, you'll hear from members of XReg Consulting and Hogan Lovells teams about some of the key factors you need to consider when making your choice of EU country. If you have any questions as we proceed through the webinar, please do type them in the Q&A box. There's a question mark box at the bottom of your Zoom screen, marked Q&A. Please do put your questions in there. Type them in there and we'll certainly do our very best to answer as many as we can during the last 10 minutes or so. Let me now hand you over to John Salmon. John is a partner at Hogan Lovells who leads the digital assets and blockchain practice. John.
Hi, thank you, Siân, and thank you to our good friends from XReg for co-hosting this session, really important session on MiCA with us. Delighted to be involved with this. I am obviously not based in the EU, being based in London, but being Scottish, I suppose that gives me a slight pass to be involved in this. But I'm really here, as Siân said, in my role as the co-lead of our digital assets and blockchain practice at Hogan Lovells. But very fortunate to be joined by my colleagues who are in the EU, so who will give us their view on what's happening in their jurisdiction and what's good in terms of MiCA and what's more challenging in terms of MiCA. So delighted we've got Sebastian Gros from Paris, Elisabetta from Italy, Carlos from Spain, Janelle from the Netherlands, and Emer from our Ireland office. And I'll let them introduce themselves and their jurisdictions when we get to that part of the session. But really appreciate their input onto this session, and hopefully that gives you a really good spread of what we see as probably the most important jurisdictions. And it's fair to say that we get this question almost every day, both at Hogan Lovells and at XReg: where should I set up my MiCA entity? And it is not a straightforward question, as hopefully is the reason why we've had so many attendees sign up, and hopefully we'll shine a light onto, as I say, some of the opportunities in these jurisdictions and some of the more challenging. So I'll hand now back over to Anna from XReg to take us through that, and then we'll go through the different EU jurisdictions, and Siân and I will talk about some of the messages that we've got out there. But as Siân said, if you've got questions, please do put them in the Q&A, and we will deal with them at the end. Thank you, and over to you, Anna.
Thank you, John. So to start, let's look at what the landscape for crypto asset businesses has been in the EU up until recently. So far, there have been limited anti-money laundering rules that have applied across the EU, with some national prudential regimes also implemented by limited jurisdictions. This has meant that the approach taken by different countries has differed, making it very tricky for crypto asset businesses to be able to access the single market. These crypto asset businesses have had to seek multiple licenses or registrations in the different countries where they have wanted to operate, making it quite difficult to navigate the landscape. Fortunately, this changes with the new European crypto asset law, the Markets in Crypto Assets Regulation, or MiCA. But before you start considering MiCA, it is very important to first determine what the asset you will be dealing with will be classified as. In the EU, there is an asset classification hierarchy that says that if the asset you're dealing with is considered a traditional financial instrument, then existing financial services legislation applies and not MiCA. So, for example, if the services you're providing include crypto asset derivatives, these are very likely going to be deemed to be traditional financial instruments subject to existing financial services legislation, whereas crypto asset spot exchange is very likely to be dealt with under MiCA. So this will be an important consideration. MiCA will introduce the same standards applicable throughout the European Economic Area, which is the EU's 27 member states and 3 additional EEA countries. MiCA became law in the summer last year, and it started applying to some issuers, to issuers of stablecoins this summer. Stablecoins are known as e-money tokens and asset reference tokens under MiCA. E-money tokens being those crypto assets that are pegged to a single national currency, such as Tether or USDC. And these types of crypto assets will only be able to be issued by licensed banks or licensed e-money institutions in the EU that notify their intention to do this. The other stablecoin under MiCA, asset reference tokens, are pegged to more than one currency or to any type of real-world asset or a basket of these, including, in some cases, crypto assets. There is another type of crypto asset that can be issued, and the requirements for these will start applying with the bulk of MiCA, which will start applying at the end of the year. So crypto asset service providers will need to start complying with this regulation by the end of the year. A crypto asset service provider will be any business that is undertaking any of 10 defined crypto asset services, such as custody and administration of crypto assets, operating a trading platform for crypto assets, exchange services of crypto assets for funds or for other crypto assets, some of the brokerage type activities, such as execution of orders and reception and transmission of orders, and some other ancillary activities that you can see on this table. As you can see, many of these or most of these activities very much mirror those that are currently in scope of existing financial services legislation. What changes here is the type of asset to which the activity relates. So MiCA will introduce passporting rights for CASPs, which means that a crypto business will only need to be licensed in one jurisdiction to be able to provide its services throughout the other 29 EEA states without having to seek additional permissions or licenses or anything. This is a huge advantage of MiCA. In terms of reverse solicitation, which means being able to provide services to customers at their own initiative, there will be very limited situations in which this will be relied upon by non-EU CASPs, meaning that if you are providing services to EU citizens, you will need to comply with the rules under MiCA, which includes being established and authorized in the bloc. In, for example, cases where a non-EU issuer is issuing a stablecoin that is pegged to a national currency in the EU, that will be considered to be issued in the EU. So the requirements will still apply. In cases where crypto asset service providers are very large or certain stablecoins are used widely among other criteria, these entities may be deemed to be significant and therefore subject to additional supervision. The rules under MiCA predominantly cover things like transparency and disclosure requirements, including environmental impacts and sustainability factors, the safekeeping of customer assets and consumer protection. There is also a huge emphasis on governance, especially on capacity, knowledge and experience, and fitness and propriety of the owners and management. There are also now requirements for the detection and prevention of market abuse, own funds requirements, and some other more standard requirements that you may be familiar with, such as complaints handling and internal control and risk management systems. But the 168 pages of MiCA are not the only thing that you will need to consider to operate under these frameworks. In addition to MiCA, there are hundreds of pages in supplementary regulations in the form of regulatory or implementing technical standards and guidelines, which will apply to issuers and crypto asset service providers in the Union. We have actually put together a tracker with all of these additional components and the stages they're at, since they're not all finalized. The link is in the chat if you'd like to have a look at that. In addition to MiCA and the supplementary regulations, there are also additional pieces of legislation that it will apply to CASPs and to issuers. In the case of CASPs, there is a brand new Act on Digital Operational Resilience that includes requirements on cybersecurity, for example, and on monitoring of third-party providers. And there are additional sustainability and environmental disclosure requirements that will also apply to both issuers and CASPs. We also have a new anti-money laundering package, which includes for CASPs the travel rule in the form of the transfer of funds regulation and some additional considerations on money laundering. We briefly mentioned the asset classification of the assets you will be dealing with. It will be very important that if the activities you will be undertaking are likely to involve both types of assets, that you understand this or make an assessment early on, because it is possible to add on a crypto license to a financial services license, to a MiFID license, but it is not possible to do it the other way around. So to avoid having to apply for two separate licenses, having clarity in this regard would be useful. As always, the devil is in the detail, and there is certainly a lot of detail to get through. And with that, I will hand back to John and his team, who will take you through some of the regulatory factors to consider in 5 key jurisdictions.
Thanks very much. Thank you, Anna, and thanks very much for that very helpful summary. I think as you know, as Anna said, it's worth noting that obviously we've got across this regime, but it's also worth noting that one of the challenges with the implementation of MiCA is that although MiCA is a regulation and is meant to be a harmonizing regime, we still have a virtual asset service provider regime in each of the member states, and that will continue to exist at least for the duration of the grandfathering period. So different member states will present different opportunities and different challenges for CASPs looking to service those jurisdictions, both in terms of the attitude of the regulation and the regulator, and the application process for getting authorization, and how easy or difficult that is. So with that in mind, we'll move on to our comparison section. And what I've asked the colleagues to do here is give an overview of what they would see as the key factors that businesses should consider in respect of their particular jurisdictions, and what's important in terms of choosing the right EU base for their business. So Sebastian, would you mind taking us forward with France, please?
Sure, thank you, John. And we have done, as you said, we have done a number of these exercises about picking the right jurisdiction. It's always difficult when we're talking about a regulation, which is, in principle should equally apply to all of the jurisdictions the same way. But I'll try to give a couple of key factors in France, which may help you guiding through your decision about which country to choose. Let me perhaps start with a preliminary comment about the crypto landscape in France. France has, I think, demonstrated a proactive approach towards regulating the digital asset industry. And more generally, the French government has expressed a keen interest in fostering innovation within blockchain and cryptocurrency sectors. So who is the regulator in France for crypto? The primary regulator is the Financial Markets Authority, Autorité des Marchés Financiers, the AMF. Is a large, sophisticated regulatory body that has also made efforts in the past to be accessible to stakeholders through consultations, guidance documents, and dedicated services for inquiries related to crypto assets. It has been mentioned during the introduction and the presentation of MiCA, all VASPs previously registered will have to transition to become CASPs. So I'll briefly outline the grandfathering period, and I'll also talk about the number of VASPs that have been already registered and what the MiCA authorization application will look like. And in France, actually, it was, as I mentioned, the government was very proactive. So there is a law that has been enacted already in March 2023, which has adapted the French VASP regime to MiCA. And the rules relating to transitional period and the authorization process from VASP to CASP in France is broadly aligned on MiCA. Just as a reminder, there's a transitional period of 18 months from the date of entry into application of MiCA, which is the 30th of December. And that means that as of then, all VASPs registered or licensed will be able to continue during that period, but will only be able to serve French public and continue to providing their services to the French public only. So the cutoff date is the 30th of June 2026, which is the end of the transitional period. And from the 1st of July, everyone will have to be authorized under MiCA by the AMF. So what is happening during the transition period? We are being asked, is actually France already allowing MiCA authorization applications? And in fact, France, as I said, was a bit in advance. So what happened is the French regulator asked, under the former regime, the VASP licenses or registrations were only possible up to the 30th of June 2023. Only if you were able to file a complete file application for VASP, you could actually be authorized or registered by the end of the year and benefit from the transitional period. With effect from the 1st of January 2024, the AMF has introduced a so-called enhanced registration regime, enregistrement renforcé, it's called, and this to prepare for the transition to the MiCA regime. So in fact, as of the 1st of January 2024, you were able to register as a VASP but under an enhanced regime, which actually already took into account all the new requirements under MiCA, particularly in terms of security, internal control systems, management of conflicts, information disclosure, and specific provisions on custody and resilient and secure IT system. So the enhanced registration regime is mandatory for the provision of virtual asset services that require a registration with the AMF, and is aligned with the licensing regime, meaning under MiCA, meaning that all the VASPs under the enhanced registration will then going forward be subject to rules that are those applicable under MiCA going forward. In terms of the licensing process, the process is 6 months as from the filing of a complete application form, and I'm insisting on the complete. So the clock only starts running as and when the French regulator, the AMF, considers the application to be complete, and that only can be done if there are preliminary meetings prior to submitting your application, but then also all along the application process, you will have exchanges with the regulator. What are the languages that are allowed for the filing of the license? In principle, and also for the ongoing reporting, in principle, everything needs to be in French, but we have experienced cases in the past where the regulator has accepted at least parts of the application, the annexes in particular, to be in English, but this needs to be discussed with the regulator. Just to give you the last element in terms of statistics, where are we in terms of CASP registrations or VASP registrations benefiting from the transitional grandfathering period? So I looked it up yesterday, so the numbers are fresh. We have 106 VASPs registered in France. One has been licensed under the optional license procedure. And I mentioned that intermediate period in 2023, where the AMF asked VASPs, or those who wanted to become VASPs, to file before the 30th of June. Just in 2023, the AMF registered 49 VASPs, which is around 50% more than in 2022. I hope I was in time with my 4 minutes allocated speaking slot. And then I would hand over to the next jurisdiction, which is, I think, Italy. I would hand over to you, Elisabetta.
Yeah, thank you, Sebastian. Excellent.
Thank you very much.
Thank you both. Thank you. So, with respect to Italy, I will provide some key factors as well. First of all, who are the competent supervisory authorities in Italy for MiCA? Both CONSOB and Bank of Italy will be the competent supervisory authority for CASPs. CONSOB will be the competent regulator to receive CASP's application and supervise their compliance with conduct of business and transparency rules, while the Bank of Italy will be the regulator in charge of supervising compliance with, among other things, prudential requirements and anti-money laundering. Italian supervisory authorities are, let's say, generally known as quite stringent and formalistic regulators, but they have so far adopted our more, let's say, flexible and more friendly approach toward the crypto service providers. Indeed, it should be noted that Italy adopted a very light regime for VASPs, which is one of the less stringent in Europe. VASPs are currently indeed only subject to a mere registration with the OIM, which is the regulator in charge of keeping the VASP register in Italy. With respect to MiCA as well, CONSOB has so far several times invited market operators to open a dialogue and liaise with them regarding the application dossier and the applicable requirements under MiCA, establishing, let's say, a sort of pre-filing. And CONSOB itself expressly indicated that this sort of pre-filing and preliminary interaction with the regulator would actually allow to speed up the application process once it will be possible to submit formal applications under MiCA. As to the language of the MiCA application in Italy, the regulators, both CONSOB and Bank of Italy, informally indicated the possibility to file at least part of the MiCA application in English. This has not been officially confirmed, but there may be ground to discuss this possibility directly with Consob in the context of the profiling. Italy provided also a quite detailed transitional regime from the current domestic VASP legal framework to the CASP and MiCA regime. Also considering that to date, there are 152 VASPs which are already enrolled in Italy with the OIM and fully operating. So VASP currently operating in Italy should take into account the transitional regime provided under a dedicated decree, which has been approved before the summer in Italy, and must take the necessary step to apply for a CASP license by the end of June of next year. So more in detail with respect to the transitional regime provided for Italy. VASPs who are already enrolled in the register kept by OAM at the 27th of December of this year, which apply for a MiCA license either in Italy or in another member state within the 30 June 2025, will be allowed to continue to operate, and they may continue to operate according to the current VASP regime until the end of next year or until a MiCA authorization is granted or denied if earlier. VASP already enrolled which instead do not submit a MiCA application as a CASP either in Italy or in another member state by the 30th of June 2025 will have to terminate their business in Italy. Another requirement regarding the transitional regime which has been introduced in Italy is that VASP are required to inform their clients and also make available information on their website by the end of May, specific information about the steps that will be taken to comply with MiCA or how they will manage to close the existing relationship in Italy if they do not intend to apply for a CASP license in Italy. And this was an overview for Italy.
Thank you, Elisabetta. Carlos, are you going to cover us from Spain, please?
Absolutely. Well, it's worth starting by.
Sorry, Carlos, I think your mic is maybe up your. Can you move your mic? Yeah.
Now I think, yeah.
Yeah, much better. Thank you.
Apologies for that one. Well, I think it's worth starting by saying that Spain stands out mainly for its leap forward the implementation of rules applicable to crypto-related business. And in fact, Spain, and even before we focus on MiCA, was one of the first EU jurisdictions where steps were first taken towards regulating crypto asset-related activity. Just to give you an example, in 2022, the Spanish regulator CNMV introduced for the first time rules to regulate the advertising of crypto assets, and hence ensure that investors in this sort of product are, better protected. So these advertising rules, in addition to the anti-money laundering rules applicable to virtual assets across the EU, largely shaped the regulatory framework for crypto assets in Spain to date. So turning back to MiCA, as you all well know, member states had to take a decision on the implementation period in each country. As if no decision was taken, MiCA would generally apply from July 2026 as regards crypto asset service providers. So Spain took the decision to bring forward the application of MiCA by 6 months so that it will be generally applicable from January 2025. And consistent with this intention to front load the implementation of rules on the crypto asset sphere, Spain also took the decision to reduce the MiCA transitional regime so that will end in December 2025 instead of June 2026. So in this way, crypto asset service providers registered with the Bank of Spain as a result of the AML rules will be able to continue to carry out business in Spain after MiCA's implementation until that date. But we will touch on that one a bit later, I think. So as I said before that, who will be the regulator? The CNMV will be the Spanish competent authority for the supervision of MiCA compliance, notwithstanding the fact that the Bank of Spain will exercise certain supervisory functions, specifically over stablecoin issuers. So for some time now, the CNMV has been preparing and taking a series of measures to fulfill these new tasks, ranging from the reinforcement of staff with the largest recruitment drive in its history, with 80 new positions to strengthen the authorization and supervision teams, training of staff, of course, specific to crypto environment, and publication of guidance. So precisely on this last point, the CNMV made available this summer the templates for applying for the licenses required by MiCA. And these are essentially two templates. First, a standardized notification template, which shall be used by financial institutions that are already licensed, namely banks, investment firms, fund managers, and IMON institutions. And the second is the authorization handbook template, which shall be used by all other entities. So it's worth noting that this authorization form is highly information intensive and sophisticated. And actually, to illustrate the difference between these two procedures, while the notification template is around 38 pages long, the authorization handbook is more than 100 pages long. Also, I think we can highlight a couple of points concerning the application process per se. The first is that the application must be made electronically, which certainly makes things easier. And the second is the language. While the CNMV usually allows certain information to be submitted in English, subject, of course, to discussing this beforehand with the CNMV, both applications should in principle be submitted in Spanish, fully in Spanish. So all information in different language must include a certified translation, safe for English, of course. Consistent with that one, communication with the CNMV shall generally be in Spanish. Thus, reporting obligation must be also fulfilled in Spanish. So to sum up, I think that local language skills are a key issue to consider here. As for the application timeline, authorization application can actually be submitted to the CNMV from September this year, although the CNMV has publicly stated that will not issue any authorization until the end of year, 30 December this year at least. So in practice, I think that, well, crypto asset service providers that are registered with the new MiCA license will coexist for a certain period of time with those virtual asset service providers registered with the Bank of Spain, which of course have not yet adapted to the new requirements. And as I said, the transition period starts in January and will extend throughout the year, so that current crypto service providers that are already registered with the Bank of Spain as BASPs will be able to continue providing crypto-related business until December 2025. I mean, it goes without saying that it is advisable for these virtual asset service providers to start working on the relevant application well in advance, mainly because of this sophistication and complexity of the files. I think that just to wrap up and give you a glimpse of the current scene in Spain, there are around 120, 125 entities currently registered as virtual asset service providers with the Bank of Spain.
Great. Thank you very much, Carlos. That was very helpful. Janelle, can I ask you just to cover the Netherlands, please?
Thank you, John. I'm happy to briefly discuss the main regulatory factors that you should consider when choosing the Netherlands to obtain your MiCA license. The authority for the financial markets, the AFM, is the Dutch regulator responsible for handling the MiCA license applications and will also be the first point of contact for all matters related for ongoing supervision. The AFM will liaise with the Dutch Central Bank, which is the other Dutch regulator called DNB. And DNB can be contacted for questions on prudential requirements such as capital requirements and the assessment of qualifying holdings. The AFM oversees a wide array of financial institutions and has a solid reputation for its open lines of communication. This means that you can work closely with the AFM to ensure your application process moves smoothly, whether you're a large financial institution or a smaller service provider. The MiCA application process and ongoing reporting to the AFM can be done in Dutch and English. Also, the AFM publishes guidelines in both Dutch and English. This makes the Dutch market accessible to both local and international market participants. As already mentioned, it is required that CASP secure their MiCA licenses by 30 December of this year to offer or continue offering their services in the Netherlands. From April 2024, CASPs can submit their applications, and upon AFM approval, licenses will become operational from 30 December 2024. A transitional period applies to facilitate the transition of existing VASPs to the new CASP regime. VASPs that operate in or from the Netherlands are currently registered with the DNB in accordance with the Dutch AML legislation. And at the moment, the DNB register includes 44 VASPs. The Netherlands plans to limit the transitional period for those VASPs to 6 months. This means that CASPs can currently provide their services based on their DNB registration and may continue to do so until 30 June 2025. After that, a MiCA license from the AFM or from another European regulator is required to keep operating in the Netherlands. The fees are considered an essential factor, and the AFM charges fees in relation to a MiCA application process that amount to €200 per hour with a maximum cap of 100,000, which is a very broad range. The AFM has been more specific in relation to the fit and proper assessments of the owners and the members of the management body of a CASP. Those are priced at €700 per person for the propriety assessments and 2,900 per person for the fitness assessment. A noteworthy point in this respect is that the fees may be lower for individuals previously assessed by DNB in the context of a DNB registration. The timeline is another essential factor for planning your market entry. While the statutory processing time is around 5 months, in practice this is often extended as the AFM conducts extensive checks on applicants' business model, governance structure, risk management, and compliance procedures. So realistically, you should anticipate around 6 to 12 months from submission to final approval, which could vary based on the completeness and quality of the application documentation and the complexity of the business model and the services provided. Also, a timeline may be longer due to the high volume of applications anticipated as VASPs transition to CASPs, and so far the pathway for obtaining a MiCA license in the Netherlands.
Okay, thanks, Janelle. That was very helpful indeed. Eimear, do you want to just give us a few minutes on Ireland, please?
Sure, thanks, John. So with regards to the crypto landscape in Ireland, the jurisdiction has attracted some of the biggest names in the industry as their European headquarters, but there are only 15 VASPs registered in Ireland compared to the hundreds in some other EU jurisdictions. The regulator regulating this industry is the Central Bank of Ireland, or the CBI. The CBI is regarded as a tough but robust and credible regulator. So while it's not necessarily the easiest jurisdiction to get licensed, it still is a very attractive jurisdiction for a lot of the biggest players in the fintech industry. A license from the central bank is perceived as a high mark of credibility and trust for investors, the public, and other national regulators. In terms of the transitional period, an applicant firm that's not currently registered and operating as a VASP in Ireland by the 30th of December 2024 can't avail of the transitional arrangements under MiCA and won't be able to operate as a CASP until it has received a CASP authorization either in Ireland or in another EU jurisdiction. VASPs seeking to become MiCA authorized will need to go through a full MiCA CASP authorization process, so there's no ability to grandfather an existing VASP registration. And if a firm hasn't yet commenced its VASP registration process with the CBI, it's too late now to avail of a MiCA transitional period. I think that's a question that was asked in the Q&A. So the CBI has said it's no longer accepting VASP registration applications, and instead it's advising firms to pursue your CASP authorization application. In terms of the transitional period, if you are an existing VASP, that's 12 months that you have until you get your CASP authorization. We haven't yet had a legislative amendment to remove the VASP registration requirement, but CBI has indicated that it won't expect firms to have both a FASP registration and a CASP authorization. So the VASP registration process will fall away once MiCA is implemented. We do await written guidance on on this particular point. The CBI hasn't yet published its MiCA authorization application forms, but it has outlined the authorization process. So just to manage firms' expectations, you should be prepared for an initial engagement meeting with the central bank. You'll need to present your proposal. You'll then be invited to submit a key facts document, or KFD. Central bank does intend to publish a standard template for the KFD along with guidance on how to complete that. Central bank assesses the KFD to determine if the application is aligned with its supervisory expectations. In our experience from authorizations in other sectors, that KFD process can be quite an iterative process. Once that process has been finalised, the applicant will then be invited to submit its CASP authorization application forms. Unlike the Netherlands, there are no fees involved in submitting a CASP authorization application to the CBI, but firms should be mindful when budgeting of the minimum substance that CBI will likely require on the ground in Ireland, including, depending on the nature, scale and complexity of the firm, a CEO, COO, head of compliance, MLRO, head of risk, and at least they specify that they will require at least one independent non-executive director with digital assets experience. In terms of timing, the full process for a CASP application will really depend on the nature, scale and complexity of the firm and the extent to which the applicant is prepared. Based on our experience, we found that really well-prepared firms who are willing to engage transparently and cooperatively in the authorization process proceed through the process quite efficiently. But applicants should still give themselves at least a year from initial engagement with the CBI until authorization is granted. So that's Ireland.
Great, thanks, Emer. So just to be super brief, because we're, as ever, just a little bit behind time, I just thought, given that you've all heard each other's jurisdictions, and maybe starting with you, Emer, if you don't mind, could you just give us like 30 seconds on why Ireland?
Yeah, so for Ireland, we have a very buoyant financial services industry with highly qualified talent and a skilled English-speaking workforce. I already mentioned that for fintechs, Ireland is becoming the high watermark for regulation and credibility in Europe. It's where you go if you want to show that you're a serious fintech player. The downside, however, is that the authorization process will likely be lengthy and arduous.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Janelle?
30
seconds on your pitch for the Netherlands.
Yes, for the Netherlands, the MiCA application process is overseen by the AFM, that is considered accessible and appealing due to its clear guidelines, dual language support and collaborative approach. However, the AFM's thorough regulatory checks and high workload can result in extended response times and requiring firms to prepare a potentially time-intensive process.
Okay, thank you. Carlos?
Yep. Well, I think Spain is a market that is firmly determined to be one of the front runners in the cryptocurrency arena, and is gradually equipping the regulator with new tools and capabilities to face this new industry. But issues such as the language, the regulator's stringent approach, and certain gold plating are nevertheless key factors to be taken into account by specifically non-Spanish crypto asset service providers when considering whether to do business in Spain.
Thank you. Elisabetta.
Yeah, Italy, I think that the possibility to make a pre-filing in Italy with Consob, so starting right now to liaise with the regulator, would allow to significantly speed up the CASP application process, and this may result and may be viewed as a great competition advantage in the market.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And Sebastian?
Well, I've thought about that, and my pitch would, well, in the past, you remember, John, when
Yes.
we did these questions, I always put forward the Rugby World Cup and the Olympics, but this is now over, so I had to look for other arguments. So I have a couple of pros. It's actually the sophistication of the regulator, qualified workforce, interest of the government to make France one of the places for crypto. We have a vibrant crypto community. In France. The cons, and I thought really hard about this, but there are a couple. So it's probably complexity of labor law in France, cost of hiring, taxation, and altogether actually very costly compliance requirements.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you very much to the Hogan Lovells team. That was really excellent roundup and very interesting to hear all your views. Siân, over to you. The juices, I'm sure, are flowing now, Siân, right?
Especially since you've just had the runners lined up at the starting gate, and you've left me with the final gallop. So
yes, indeed.
Thank you for that, John. Well, look, MiCA will not be your only consideration when choosing the right EU country for crypto.
As Sebastian has just set out with the labour law and tax, yeah, absolutely.
There are others, some are regulatory, some are not, but all of them are absolutely vital. Perspectives will, of course, be different for existing EU businesses trying to decide whether to stay in their present home country or to move to another country in the EU. For pre-launch startups and for those currently outside the EU looking to launch their operations in the Union. Let me touch. I know it's been briefly mentioned, AML, but of course it is a crucial piece. And currently, as has been mentioned, each member state has its own laws and regulations relating to money laundering, albeit under an overarching anti-money laundering directive. But inevitably, this fragmented approach has led to some degree of arbitrage across the Union. Now that's set to change with a recently passed EU AML package that sees a completely updated anti-money laundering directive, AMLD6, which governs what EU countries must do. Within the package are also provisions for the creation of an entirely new pan-European AML agency called AMLA, and most importantly, the implementation of a single comprehensive AML rulebook applicable across all countries. Now, with the exception of some firms which may be supervised directly by AMLA when it's operational, and I'll just touch on that in a moment, AML will still be supervised and enforced at a national level, not only under this new single rulebook, but also under additional national regulations. In terms of timelines, there are varying timelines stretching from next year through to 2029. And so there's going to be quite a mishmash of existing AML regulation coupled with the new pieces that come into play. Now, unlike MiCA and also MiFID, there is no passporting for AML, neither now nor after the new package becomes effective. One still has to comply with the AML regulations of each EU country in which you operate or in which you offer your services. And currently, some EU countries require you to have an in-country AML person, even if your offices are elsewhere in the EU and you're supervised in that home country. Those individual EU country requirements may indeed remain in place, certainly for some countries, even after the introduction of the new single rulebook. Now, these considerations may not only affect your decision on where in Europe to base your crypto asset service businesses, but also in which other EU countries you market or offer your products and services. The MiCA approach to pan-European approach is still going to remain somewhat fragmented under these new arrangements. Talent is, of course, has been touched on, and it's the most significant non-regulatory consideration for any business. It's people. For those jobs where at least some physical presence is required, the availability of talented people with the right skills and qualifications, industry knowledge, and relevant experience is crucial. Labour markets vary considerably across the EU. Talent is often scarce, especially in jobs where there are global shortages, such as in regulatory compliance. Language skills also vary widely. Notwithstanding the UK is leaving the EU, English still remains the spoken language between regulators and technical folks and people in finance and the law. However, fluency in English varies greatly across the Union. If you need to relocate to another EU country, you also need to consider all manner of national employment laws, employee rights, and their respective costs. While moving for work within the EU is relatively straightforward, each EU nation has its own approach to coming to live and work there from outside the EU, some welcoming, some more restrictive. The availability and cost of office and residential property also varies widely across the EU and even within different regions or between different regions and cities in the same country. Some EU countries have a thriving startup scene and a founder culture. Many are crypto specific. Banks' openness to servicing crypto business also varies across the EU. While not on the scale of Silicon Valley or the USA more generally, some EU countries do host a vibrant and active VC environment. Other considerations when deciding where to set up or move to include the cost of living, transport connections, internet reliability, speeds and latency, social and cultural life, the availability of childcare, personal safety, corruption, customs and cultural norms, even equality and diversity and attitudes towards foreigners. These are just a few of the many factors we take into consideration when undertaking jurisdictional analyses for clients. I do also just want quickly to touch on another couple of factors. They're linked, but nonetheless distinct, and that's to do with geopolitics and national politics. The outcome of next month's US presidential and congressional elections will undoubtedly have an impact on the success of MiCA in Europe. Right now, Europe leads the way among Tier 1 jurisdictions with having a comprehensive regulatory framework for crypto, one that provides legal certainty and clear rules. But this cannot be said of the USA until now. That will very likely change depending on who moves into the White House next January and what the composition of the two houses of Congress will be. Where crypto asset businesses go to open new markets will, in some measure, depend on the ease of obtaining capital and market size, legal and regulatory certainty, and the cost of compliance. Some of those may no longer be just within Europe's leadership. While the US continues to face off China, of course, the EU has a belligerent neighbor in Russia, seeking to expand its sphere of influence ever closer to the EU. And already some EU member state governments have begun to lean in the direction of Moscow and away from Brussels. There's also the consideration of the right and the far right in European politics, which is already starting to have an effect on EU policy making. Of course, this isn't an exclusively European issue, but it can and should have a bearing on the choice of EU country for one's crypto asset business. And my very last point, as I use my whip on my horse here, galloping towards our finish time. And that is perhaps a more general point, but nevertheless something that I feel is important and something worth bearing in mind concerning the EU and crypto. And that is relating to DeFi services. DeFi services, and here I mean true DeFi services, are not covered by MiCA. Crypto asset services that are carried out in a, and I quote, a wholly decentralized manner are excluded from MiCA. DeFi tokens are still likely to be crypto assets, but true DeFi services are outside the scope of MiCA. And such true DeFi services are not crypto asset service providers and as such are not subject to the new AML package. That is something that's reserved for other licensed obliged entities such as banks and financial institutions, but also, and this has been just introduced in the new package, all manner of crypto asset service providers. Just being a CASP in Europe makes you subject to these new provisions. Now, the European co-legislators are going to consider whether true DeFi it needs more of their consideration. That will happen over the next months and years. But for now, it is not. There's nothing specific on the horizon. So whether or not a service is undertaken in a wholly decentralized manner, as far as MiCA is concerned, is very much a relevant question. And it is a complex topic and one that requires legal advice and also a decentralization assessment. So I know that's an awful lot to take in, and I won't summarize it, but I'll hand back to you, John, to take us towards the finish line.
Okay, thank you, Siân. Yeah, I totally agree on the DeFi point. I mean, it seems, you know, there's no appetite to do anything on that anytime soon, given the amount of regulation that people are already dealing with. But completely agree that I think it's a serious challenge as to whether MiCA applies in any DeFi sense, and something that we spend quite a lot of time stressing about at the moment. I think just a couple of quick messages from me. I mean, Siân, to use Siân's galloping analogy, we are galloping towards the applicable date of MiCA. There is a lot to do. So if you haven't started looking at this already, please do. You know, start. That might seem an obvious point. I think the other point just to make is that there is a lot of other regulation around MiCA. We've heard, you know, Sebastian talked about employment law and tax, and Siân's talked about many other things, but there are lots of other bits to MiCA. Particularly DORA is another area which I think is under, people tend to be unprepared for. And what you will expect is that you know, if you want to do your MiCA authorization, all of your vendor contracts will have to be DORA compliant as part of that whole process. We would expect, right, the regulators to want all of that in place. So getting your MiCA authorization is a huge challenge. You should start now, but it's only the beginning. There's a lot of other things to do. So I don't, you know, I want to just, you know, I think there is, I really appreciate everyone's input. Really enjoyed, you know, once again, working with XReg on this. Thank you very much to our XReg colleagues for organizing this so well. Thank you very much to my Hogan Lovells colleagues for taking us through the jurisdictions. I always find this a really interesting topic, and thank you all for attending. Really appreciate it.
And thank you.
We will follow up with details, and if you want any help, please, you know, contact your usual contact, Hogan Lovells or XReg or Siân or myself, and we'll be pleased to pass you on to the right person.
Yes, I think we'll just pop a couple of email addresses. There they go. So should you not have an existing contact person there are at least a couple of email addresses that are being put up there now. There's John's and our general inquiry one as well. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending. I'm sorry we didn't have time in the end to address all of the questions, but
I think I've hopefully picked up quite a lot of them.
Quite a few of them in.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, everyone. Have a great day the rest of the day.
Thank you very much. Thanks, and take care. Bye.